What's up everybody, and welcome back to my channel. If my kitchen looks a little different today, it's because it is. This is not my kitchen. I'm at the beach and I wanted to make a lemon meringue pie while I was at the beach, so let's dive into this recipe. So let's start with the crust. First, you are going to need 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour. And then to that, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of kosher salt, or half a teaspoon of fine sea salt, mixed with 1 tablespoon of sugar. Once your sugar and salt has been added to your flour, you simply just want to whisk this stuff together to incorporate those dry ingredients. Now you're going to need 2 sticks of unsalted butter. I like this Challenge brand butter, and good butter will lead to a flaky pie crust. Now I'm taking each stick individually and cutting it lengthwise into 3 sections, and then I'm going to kind of just dice that up into large cubes. So the goal here is to essentially just cut this into nice, small, even pieces that will eventually become crumbly within the flour. And if you have a food processor, this is the time to use it because it will make this process much faster. But if you're like me and didn't have one on hand, you can definitely do this by hand. Once your butter is cut into nice small cubes, we're going to add that while it is really cold to our flour mix. Then I like to just simply break it down between my fingers until it is roughly pea-sized in texture and shape. Now you really need ice water to keep this crust nice and flaky, and you're slowly going to stream in 4 to 8 tablespoons. It definitely varies depending on your flour, and it is always different every time that I make pie crust, but essentially you want enough to where the dough will hold together into a nice disc. So I like to pour it in, move it around with my fork, and just simply keep adding it until it will hold together into a nice shape. For reference here, this is after I added about 4 or 5 tablespoons of water, and as I squeeze it with my hand it still kind of falls apart, so I definitely need to add a little bit more here. After adding in just a little bit more ice water, my dough should look something like this and come together nicely, but still be a little bit shaggy and kind of loose feeling. Once you have your pie crust shaped into a disc, cover it with plastic wrap and let it sit in the refrigerator for at least 2 hours, but ideally overnight. It will develop more flavor overnight, but if you're in a pinch, you can definitely do this for a couple of hours, but definitely don't go less than 2 hours because the butter needs time to set and everything needs to be cold and remain cold for a nice flaky pie crust. Alright, so the pie crust is done for now, and we can focus on making the custard for our pie. Here I'm simply separating the egg yolk and whites from 5 eggs because we're going to need the whites for the meringue topping, and we're going to need the yolks for the filling. The best way to do this is to grab 2 bowls, crack an egg, and then kind of just toss the egg yolk without breaking it between 2 hands, separating the white and the yolk. Now I'm going to save these egg whites, cover them with plastic wrap, and we will get to the meringue after we make the filling. So for the custard filling, we're just going to break these eggs up and whisk them all together and set those aside. For a lemon meringue pie, you obviously need lemons. I bet you did not expect that, did you, buddy? So first we're going to start off with roughly a tablespoon of lemon zest. I would say just go ahead and zest 2 lemons, and that will give it a nice flavor. The zester that I am using is pretty large, so I'm going to give this a nice fine chop with my knife. I just like to hold the tip of my knife with my non-dominant hand, then use my dominant hand to finely chop this lemon zest. Now just scoop that up and set it aside. If you want to know how many lemons to get for the right amount of juice, there's really no answer here because some lemons are obviously more juicier than others. So I would go ahead and get 6 lemons total. You'll likely only need 3. I in fact only needed 2, but the goal here is to juice enough lemons to get a half cup of lemon juice. Alright, once you have your lemons juiced, you are going to head over to the stove and get a medium-sized pot where we can go ahead and get started on this custard. Start by adding 1 1/3 cup of filtered water, your half cup of lemon juice, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of lemon zest, 1/3 cup of cornstarch. This is what's going to thicken the custard and give it that nice texture that you all know and love. 1 cup of granulated sugar. Then place that over medium heat and whisk all of those ingredients together. At first, your mixture will look kind of cloudy like you see mine here. After about 6 minutes, it will become nice and bubbly and a little bit more clear like you see here. go ahead and drop your temperature down to low. Now we're going to take our filling and slowly add probably 2 or 3 of these large spoonfuls over to our egg yolks. This is going to temper the eggs and prevent them from curdling once we add them to our hot pot. If you immediately add the eggs in without bringing them up to the same temperature, they will cook and you will have a scrambled egg pie. After bringing your eggs up to temperature, we're just going to slowly add these in while whisking into our hot mixture that is on the stove. While whisking, you're going to bring your temperature back up to medium and just mix these eggs in, and you're going to let this sit until it starts to bubble just like the last time. Once this custard begins to bubble, we are going to take it off of the heat, adding in 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter, which is going to add another level of richness to this custard filling. So personally, I decided to make my custard a day ahead of time, so I made the pie crust today and put it in the refrigerator, and now I'm going to store this in the refrigerator as well. If you wanted to make this all in one day, you would have to go through the first process of cooking your pie crust to begin with and then immediately adding this in, but I found this to be a lot of work for one day. What I'm getting at is that if you decide to make this all in one day, you would go ahead and make your pie crust first, give it that first initial bake, and then pour your custard in, but we'll get to that in a minute. Alright, it's the next day and I have my pie crust here, and I've let this sit out for roughly 5 minutes to kind of warm up just a little bit to make it easier to work with. That being said, you don't want it to be too warm because it will make this pie crust not flaky. So I'm using a wine bottle here because I don't have a rolling pin, and I'm kind of just pressing lines down this to kind of spread it out a little bit. So here's a closer look. I'm simply taking my bottle or rolling pin, going down it, and then rolling it out. Then I'm going to turn that 90 degrees and do the exact same thing, pressing my lines down and then rolling it out. And you're going to do this until your pie crust becomes nice and thin. As you can see, it's cracking on the edge, and you can definitely patch that up as you go. Unfortunately, I could not film me putting this into my pie crust, so for me, I'm using just a tinfoil pan. I would definitely recommend that you don't use a tinfoil pan because they kind of suck for baking pies, but if it's all you got, I will give you a tip on what to do with that. So after I've got my pie crust laid in, I'm just going to trim the edges. I will say that you want this to be almost paper thin, not quite paper thin, but think of when you bite into a piece of pie and how thick or thin that crust is on the bottom, and that will give you kind of the representation of how thick you need to make your crust. Mine was a little bit thick on the bottom, but it still turned out tasting great. Alright, once the edges are trimmed, we're just going to crimp this using our index and thumb as well as a knuckle on our other hand, and you're just going to simply do this all the way around your pie. This isn't necessary, but it does give it that classic pie look that will make your pie Instagram worthy, and you want to make your pie Instagram worthy because you want your food to look good, because half of eating is with your eyes. Alright, so the pie is crimped all the way around. I'm going to place this in the freezer for 10 minutes to get it nice and firm. Once this has sat for 10 minutes, you simply just want to take a fork and poke holes through the bottom of your pie crust. This will prevent it from puffing up in the oven, and this method is called docking. Once that's done, we have to perform a piece of the baking method called the par bake, which stands for partially baking or blind baking, where you cover your pie with some tin foil and simply just set some baking beans in here or some dried rice, which I think that pretty much everybody has in their house, and it's the cheapest option in my opinion. Also, be sure to spread your rice evenly from edge to edge. This will help with the baking process. Alright, so if you want to get a good pie crust using a crappy pie pan like this tinfoil one, you want to preheat your oven with a baking sheet on the lowest rack. If you're doing this with a normal pie pan, you don't have to add the baking sheet, but I would recommend using the lowest rack. I've preheated my oven with the pan as well on the lowest rack at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to blind bake our pie crust for 20 minutes at this temperature. It also might take up to 30 minutes for this process, so I would just say go for 25 minutes. In the meantime, we're not going to sit around for 25 minutes and do nothing, so we're going to add half a teaspoon of cream of tartar to our egg whites, then grab a hand mixer and combine the egg whites and cream of tartar for 1 minute on medium speed. Then you're going to increase the speed to high and whip these together for about 5 more minutes until soft peaks form. You'll know you have soft peaks once you turn off your mixer and pull it up out of the meringue and have soft peaks. From here you're adding in half a cup of sugar and 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, and then you're just going to once again beat this on high until you have nice glossy stiff peaks in your meringue. This will take approximately 2 minutes from the point where you had soft peaks. When I pull my mixers out of this meringue, they are nice and glossy and the peaks hold nicely. At this point your blind bake should be done, and now I'm just going to take some egg wash, which consists of 1 egg beaten together with a splash of water, and just kind of cover the bottom of this crust and then place it back in the oven for 3 more minutes. Alright, so I did let my pie crust cool completely for about an hour, and now I'm going to spoon in my custard filling. I did have to kind of whip this together with my fork, and that will bring it back to a custard consistency. Once your custard has been added, you can go ahead and add the meringue on top. I will say you do need to heat your custard up for about 15 seconds in the microwave, and this will help bond the meringue and the custard. So as you can see, I'm spooning this meringue right over top of the custard, and initially go ahead and try to spread it out as much as possible and get it into all of those little crimped edges on your pie crust. Once your mountain of meringue has been added, you can kind of use the back of your spoon, picking up on it to get these nice little textures that look pretty cool once it's done baking. Go ahead and drop your oven temperature down to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and if you're using a foil pan like me, continue to use that baking sheet. And I went ahead and tinted my pie with some tin foil because the meringue was browning kind of quickly, but you're going to cook this for 20 to 25 minutes until you have a nice looking pie just like this one. Alright everybody, the lemon meringue pie is complete. As you can see, we got the nice meringue on top and then the custard filling on the bottom. So let's give this a quick taste test. Pretty proud of the meringue on top. This is my first time making that, so it turned out really well. So the flavor of this is extremely good. The filling is perfect. The meringue on top is perfect. The only thing that I would do different is redo the crust. The bottom of the crust is actually kind of thick. I would have liked it for that to be a little bit thinner. Next time that I would make this again, I would definitely roll the crust out a little bit thinner, but other than that, pie is absolutely perfect. The filling tastes great, the meringue is great, and the crust is good. It's just a little thick on the bottom. Alright, so the other thing that I would definitely recommend is using an actual pie pan, because you'll get a better distribution of heat, whereas with the tinfoil pan, it's going to kind of reflect heat. So with an actual pie pan, you'll get a lot more kind of flaky crust all the way around, and it's a lot easier to work with than the thing that I use. Sometimes you have to work with what you got, and that's what we did today. It still turned out really good. Alright guys, and that is all that I have for you today. If you would, please drop a like on this video and consider subscribing to my channel, because I cook good food here every single week and I want you to be a part of this community. So with that being said, I will see you all on the next one.